Hello and welcome to TelecomTV. I'm Martin Warwick and I'm talking with Alistair Scott, who is a director in the office of the CTO at JDSU. Alistair, welcome. To begin with, JDSU is a big company, a couple of $1 billion here and there, but you're about to change in many ways. We're seeing the transformation of the network, the transformation of the industry, transformation of the service provider, the cloud, virtualization and so on. And you're changing as well with it within the company. Can you tell us about that before we really kick off?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so JDSU is actually in the next quarter, will be splitting into two companies, pretty much down the middle. So we have an optical components group that will be spun out as Lumentum Incorporated. And then within the JDSU part, will actually transition to be Viavi Solutions. And the purpose for that is really to allow the company to focus the test and measurement, service assurance into the evolving space of the telecom providers, the cloud providers, the over-the-top service providers, and really be able to focus on that whole broad segment that's going through a lot of changes and really serve that well.
Now, we mentioned the cloud, we mentioned transformation, we mentioned virtualization. What's your view on NFV? Is it a reality now? Is it becoming a reality? Has the hype cycle died away a bit and we're seeing more real-world applications?
Yeah, it's a great question. So NFV has been coming for quite some time. Obviously the work from Etsy that has really helped define what NFV means, has put some framework around that. And so it's definitely emerging. The shift to virtualization absolutely has to happen. In terms of how, what stage we're at, I think there is a reality check around exactly what does NFV mean and what are the stages to get to it. It's kind of a journey, not a full destination on its own right. But the step-by-step move towards virtualizing physical functions into the network is underway. I think a lot of the technical barriers to those are gradually getting addressed and performance is improving. And certainly the service providers are encouraging and pushing along that process. They're definitely keen to see that transition as rapidly as possible and be confident to be able to move it into a production environment.
Now, given SDN and NFV obviously is a global phenomenon and trend, what is JDSU's strategy for NFV?
Yeah, so we look at it from a couple of different directions. One is looking across our product portfolio to understand how do we virtualize those and allow those to be orchestrated and managed in a fully or hybrid virtualized environment. The other part is looking at the service provider environment and saying what new requirements does that introduce for our product suite to make sure that we address not just the legacy performance indicators and troubleshooting models that they required in the past, but going forward in a more dynamic network environment with virtualization and shared resources. What new constraints and requirements does that bring into that space? And looking further ahead, what opportunities does that offer for closed control loop optimization, et cetera, and some of the more automated possibilities that are somewhat more advanced.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've touched briefly on this, Alistair, but let's get into it in a little bit more detail. What markets does JDSU play in, and what do you make of the speed of movement in that market as far as NFV is concerned, or those markets, I beg your pardon?
Yeah, so the test and measurement side for JDSU, we have a strong presence in physical, portable instrumentation. So that's a large part of our business, and we're the leader and provider of that instrumentation. On the service assurance side and more of the monitoring systems, that kind of breaks down into a couple of different spaces. Active test based for some of the service turn up and service monitoring where you're testing a service continuously, and then passive assurance where that could be across video for IPTV, it could be the mobile space for 3G, 4G, and looking ahead into 5G network environments, and then some of the other wireline like broadband services as well.
Okay. We've touched upon the sort of effects NFV is going to have on your company, because evidently you're changing the name, you're changing the entire organization as part of that. Are there any other implications for JDSU?
I think the model of engagement with service providers is definitely changing. We can see right across the board the traditional model that we've had of kind of very much waterfall supply model That's definitely shifting rapidly to this much more cooperative, collaborative environment where the service providers are really getting in around the table, even multiple vendors getting around the table, a lot more open source being looked at as a key component of any solution. And that, that much more agile, collaborative model going forward, I think is definitely changing the way that we engage with customers, the way that we do proof of concepts and trials with customers. And ultimately, as these move into production, the way that services and systems will be delivered and then evolved will change as well. So it won't be a product release is made, it sits in the lab for 6 months, it then goes through and gets gradually rolled out into the network. That whole cycle will be a much faster transition in the future. And so that's going to have significant implications, certainly in the service provider side, but also in the vendor supply side as well, on how the two interact.
You led me beautifully into my next question by saying implications for the service providers. What are they?
I think right now there's a lot of work around the engineering and the architecture work to really understand what type of OSS and BSS framework for operating the network and making sure they can build for services running across it, a convergence in there. So I think they're seeing some of their major platforms, and these are huge transition for these platforms, as they come together and then need to be re-engineered. So there's a lot of software architecture work gradually trying to figure out what that future state needs to look like. I think culturally, skill set wise, all of the amount of retraining and understanding what it means to be operating this much more dynamic platform, essentially moving a network from a transport platform hosting specified services to a more of an innovation platform where not just the service provider but other application developers can come on and innovate with new services on top of that platform. It's a very significant cultural shift for the company as a whole and what its identity is in the services that it delivers. So I think that is probably the biggest challenge, is just the sheer number of people that are and that kind of rebranding and moving that identity forward is major.
Now, JDSU is in big partnership with Alcatel-Lucent. Why and what are you doing?
Yeah, so we're in the cloud band ecosystem. We're pleased to be in there for our service assurance products for mobile and for our active test products for Ethernet service assurance, for example. We certainly see the cloud band, customer feedback and guidance to us has been to really take advantage of cloud band. It was one of the early orchestration systems to be released and I think one of the first ecosystems really to be established. And I think as these standards evolve, it's very much a case where the early implementations become the kind of guide the other ones, right? And I think Alcatel-Lucent's done a very good job of achieving that with that customer engagement, as well as moving that forward. I think that we're at the third release of cloud band right now, so it's maturing nicely. It's got some production deployments, so we see that as an important reference point to maintain and to integrate into that ecosystem.
So that's the rationale for the partnership. What have you achieved together?
Yeah, so we've been looking at a number of items. When we do service assurance and active testing, that introduces some real strains into the system. Almost by definition, you're testing the system either to its limits or just to make sure that it's performing as specified. And that's slightly different from maybe just turning up a service and letting that service run within the environment. So we've had a number of engagements with the engineering staff in cloud band to look at how can we get our specific needs to integrate and make sure that the performance is there and the consistency, etc., in terms of bringing the products together so that we get a reliable solution as it's virtualized and moving into production, that it can generate reliable performance indicators.
What about the partnership experience itself, Alistair? What's Alcatel-Lucent like to work with? Yeah,
so they have a very nice model where they distribute webinars and informational videos, etc., right, bringing together not just other ecosystem partners, but being able to position that with customers. Obviously the product information with release notes, documentation, technical guides, but I think also with access to the technical staff to get into some of these very unique requirements that we have for testing and service assurance, being able to get to that level of engineer to engineer level discussion has been very important.
Final question, a nice one to end on, which is looking to the future. Always like to end an interview with something positive looking forward. I take it that the partnership will continue then?
Absolutely, yeah. Definitely we see Alcatel-Lucent Cloudband as one of the major platforms. You know, I think some recent surveys have been really rating it highly. You know, I think it's maturing well. The feature set's coming through. A lot of the carrier grade features that are expected to be present are emerging and you know, as we say, going into release 3, it's really starting to become that critical platform that makes it production ready. So I think that has special significance for us, obviously, as well as the end user service providers. So yeah, we see that as a good long-term relationship.
Well, Alistair Scott, good luck with the pending name change down the line, not yet, but coming, and thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.